Welcome, everybody, to this week's podcast introduction for Listening to America with Clay Jenkinson. My name is Nolan Johnson, and I get to be your co-host this week, where I get to sit down with Clay Jenkinson in my studio and discuss our plans for 2025. If you've heard my name before, it's because I am the videographer that gets to travel from time to time with Clay Jenkinson. I create all of the video content that you can find on ltamerica.org and across all of Listening to America's social media channels. I've been a part of LTA for a little over 2 years now, producing and editing the radio and podcast every week. On today's show, I get to ask Clay Jenkinson a little bit about what he learned on his travels in 2024 that might make his travels in 2025 just a little bit easier. Looking forward to 2025, Lewis and Clark is very near and dear to my heart because I grew up in a small town in North Dakota called Washburn, and that is the site, or close to the site, of the original Fort Mandan, where Lewis and Clark spent the winter of 1804-1805. It was actually my first job in high school, giving tours during the bicentennial years in 2004 and 2005 of the Fort Mandan site and at the Interpretive Center. So I'm looking forward to being able to see the Lewis and Clark Trail in its entirety and travel this country from coast to coast with Clay Jenkinson. As is with anything Listening to America, you can follow along at ltamerica.org, where you will find links to all of our social medias. We would love to hear your suggestions on what kind of content that you're looking for, and if you're able to support us at all, you can do all of that at ltamerica.org. I'm so glad I had the opportunity to sit down in my studio with Clay Jenkinson for this episode. I hope we're able to do it more in the future, and I hope you will have me back. Let's go to the show. Hello, everyone. This is Nolan Johnson, occasional host on Listening to America, and I am here in my studio with the man himself, Clay Jenkinson. Clay, we're off and running in 2025. You just got back from your retreats in Locksaw Lodge. Tell me how your winter's been going.
So it's great to be here. I love this studio, Quantum Digital in Bismarck, North Dakota. You are our editor, and you also are our videographer. You've come with me on a number of my journeys so far on the John Steinbeck Travels with Charley tour, and now we're planning the next big year of travel, which is the Lewis and Clark journey, and that's something of almost unbelievable importance to me and importance to you because you have some history with Fort Mandan just up the road here. So 2 5-day retreats at this beautiful lodge west of Missoula, Montana, up in the Bitterroot Mountains, right where Lewis and Clark were. Colt Creek, they called their campsite there. And this is a kind of retro lodge. It has all the amenities, but it's not Aspen, it's not Jackson Hole. It's not over the top, which I love. And so the first one was on Thoreau and Edward Abbey for the first week, and the second week was on 2 plays by Shakespeare. So that's over now. I brought all those books back and put them back up on the shelves. And now I'm working on Cuba because I'm taking a cultural tour to Cuba at the end of February. And so this has been such an amazing experience. I went before a couple of years ago, and it was a life-changing experience. And now I'm reading books on Castro, books on Che Guevara, books about America's policies in Cuba. Alexander von Humboldt was there in 1800 and again in 1804. He was a friend of Thomas Jefferson. So I'm better prepared this time and really excited for that. So that's just winter stuff. But meanwhile, getting ready for the big Lewis and Clark trip, which begins around May 1st.
The Travels with Charley tour was your 2024. How long before now did you know that Lewis and Clark was going to be 2025?
I had chosen Lewis and Clark as the second year right from the beginning. I didn't want to start that way. I wanted to start with Steinbeck because it gave me this great excuse to travel around the perimeter of the country, a kind of shakedown cruise. And the Lewis and Clark story is more complicated because we know campsites, we know where they built their forts, we know where they had their encounters with native peoples. We have a gigantic record of Lewis and Clark. It runs to 13 volumes in the University of Nebraska edition, edited by the great editor Gary Moulton. And I've been at this for 35 years, so this is something that it's almost in my blood. So I didn't want that to be the first one because I wanted the first one to be about figuring out how to do it, how to haul a 23-foot trailer, how to back it up, how to hook it up, how to level it when you need to level it, what kind of campsites are best for it, how many miles you can really go in a day, could I track Steinbeck on his journey in 1960? I just wanted to get a sense of how to do a trip like this. And it was, as you know, very successful. I'm still writing about it, and I'll be writing about it right up until I leave in May for the Lewis and Clark trip. But now the logistics are settled. Now the great challenge for the Lewis and Clark trip is that it was a river journey, of course, and I'll be on the roads. And so the question is, how can I do this? I want to make sure that I don't just drive the Lewis and Clark Trail. I've done that a number of times. And so I'm trying to figure out pace, when to get on the water, which is very important to me. And so there are lots of logistical things that are kind of rattling around my head. I put maps out in front of me almost every day. I'm talking to people in the Lewis and Clark world. I plan to stop at every interpretive center in the country, and there are about 13 of them, I reckon, but also museums that have a lot of Lewis and Clark content. So the logistics of this trip are more complex than the logistics of the Travels with Charley tour, which is why I let that one go first.
The amount of miles on the Travels with Charley tour had to have been, what, double what you'll do for Lewis and Clark? Or how close are you going to come?
I don't know yet. I haven't. So I traveled 21,400 miles or so. That involved some backtracking because of some events that I had to go to. He traveled about 11,500 miles, Steinbeck did. So I don't think it'll be that many miles. I'm going to start at Monticello, which is where the whole idea of the expedition began. It's a brainchild of Thomas Jefferson. He'd been wanting all of his life to get an exploring party up the Missouri River and had tried previously and had not been able to make it happen. But now he was president and he had a friendly Congress, and so he got funding. So I'll start there at Monticello. I hope to have an event there. And a lot of people have expressed an interest in coming to Monticello to see the launch. My dream, Nolan, which is unlikely to bear fruit, is to actually pull the rig up to the front of the house. I'm guessing that will be a no, but you never can tell, so we'll see. I did talk my way into Steinbeck's Rocinante, his travel trailer out in Salinas, and that never happens either. So, maybe magic will be on our side. But I'll start there, and then I'm going to go to Philadelphia, which is where Lewis went to train in botany, in medicine, in celestial navigation, latitude and longitude, and so on. And then I'm going to go to Pittsburgh, where he got his boat, his keel boat, the barge, and then to Harper's Ferry, where he got his arms, his 15 Harper's Ferry rifles and the iron-framed boat, the Experiment, he called it. And then I'll get on the Ohio and go along the Ohio and go all the way down the Ohio to Cairo, Illinois, which is the mouth of the Ohio, up the Mississippi to St. Louis, up the Missouri to its source and sources in southwestern Montana, over the Bitterroot Mountains, down the Clearwater, Snake, and Columbia rivers to Fort Clatsop. So I don't know how long that is. They traveled 7,689 miles. I think it'll be more than that because I'm going to turn around at Fort Clatsop and drive back. They had some alternative routes on the way back. They did a shortcut over the Palouse in eastern Washington, and then they split up near Missoula, and Clark came down the Yellowstone. So I'm going to do that on the return journey. And then I'm going to go all the way to Hohenwald, Tennessee, about 80 miles from Nashville, where Lewis committed suicide on October 11th, 1809, and where he's buried. That's probably getting close to 20,000 miles. It'll certainly be more than 15, I think.
What are you looking forward to? Last year you were able to do a counterclockwise lap around the country. This time you're going to be going through a little more of the heartland with a little bit of overlap through North Dakota and Montana. What are you looking forward to with the difference in sites that you'll be able to come across this year?
So the Lewis and Clark Trail used to be from St. Louis to the Pacific. Recently, under the first Trump administration, Congress passed a law extending it all the way to Pittsburgh. So the official Lewis and Clark Trail is Pittsburgh to Oregon. So I've never really done the eastern part, and there's good reason for that. The Ohio River is not as open or as primitive as the Missouri. There's a lot of industry, a lot of cities. It's very well groomed. So it doesn't feel like you're on the Lewis and Clark Trail. It feels like you're on one of the main industrial arteries of the country. So I want to see that for myself, and I'm going to stop at every historical sign. I'll stop at Big Bone Lick in Kentucky, where Lewis detoured to dig up mastodon bones for Jefferson. I'll do everything that they did. And one of the things I'm planning to do, Nolan, is to get on the river on each of the main rivers. So I'll canoe the Yellowstone and the Missouri, parts of it. But I'm going to get on some sort of other boats, excursion boats or whatever, rent a boat on the Mississippi between Cairo and St. Louis, and then on the Clearwater and the Snake and the Columbia. And I'd like to actually cross the bar on the Columbia as you cross onto the Pacific Ocean. I've done it before. It's an amazing thing to do. And then on the Yellowstone too. So I've got to figure all of that out. So those are discoveries. I've never been on a boat on the Mississippi. I've never been on a boat on the Clearwater or the Snake. So I'm looking forward to that. Of course, we all want to discover where Fort Mandan was. We'll see if that's even possible, but I have a theory of that, as you know. I want to meet with all the experts, both scholars and buffs, people who know a lot about this. In fact, I wrote to one today, a man named John Jengo, who's a geologist, and asked him if he would go in a boat with me out on the Mississippi and point out some of the places that we know from the journals. Another thing that I've told you about before is here in North Dakota, where both of us live. I'd like to get on a boat, we have a friend with one, and go from the South Dakota-North Dakota border all the way up to Bismarck, and maybe all the way up to Fort Mandan. But Clark has detailed accounts of what the formations are on either side of the river there. Now it's a reservoir, Oahe Reservoir. I've never been on it. But I think if we took a boat on that and took extensive photographs and took the journals with us, we would see a lot of things that Clark identified, and it would be an amazing discovery. So, I've been at this for decades, but there are things that I've never done in the Lewis and Clark world, and this is an opportunity to do some of that.
I know you've mentioned Fort Mandan and different sites on the Missouri specifically, which we're both fairly familiar with, being from the area. How many discoveries do you think, like you were just talking about, are in North Dakota having to do with Lewis and Clark? What haven't people found that people have been looking for?
Well, of course, there's Fort Mandan. So when they came back in 1806 in August, Lewis had been shot in the buttocks, so he was incapacitated. They said goodbye to Sacagawea and Charbonneau and the boy, Jean-Baptiste Charbonneau. Lewis couldn't move much, but Clark wanted to see Fort Mandan, and so he got out of the boats and walked up to the site, and it had burned. It had either burned from a prairie fire, or more likely it was set on fire by natives of some sort who were discontented with Lewis and Clark. So we're not sure where it was. We have pretty good ideas where it was, but nothing has ever been found. And then when Maximilian from Germany came through in 1833, he said he'd been told it had washed away. I've never believed that. I believe that it's still there. Now, just there'd be some footings, there might be some artifacts. If we could discover where Fort Mandan was, it would be the greatest discovery of the last 50 years in the Lewis and Clark world. And I believe we can. Now, there are some issues, property rights, access, and so on. But I believe we have great maps that Clark made. We have the 1895 Missouri River Commission maps. We've done some, you and I and our friend Brian have done some recon. I think we can find it. That would be great. Sacagawea, this is more controversial, but Sacagawea is said to be buried on a bluff near the Grand River where old Fort Manuel Lisa was on the North Dakota-South Dakota border. And I've heard all my life about theories of where she's buried. And of course, I have no interest in doing anything about it, except that it would be really interesting to know approximately where she was buried. And so I'm interested in just taking the journals and puzzling through. The other great discovery in the Lewis and Clark world is at the Great Falls. On the way back, they had buried their iron boat when it didn't work out. On the way back, they dug it up, and I believe they carried it with them. But many people believe they buried it again. And so that's one of the things everyone wants to talk about is where is the iron frame boat? I'm pretty sure it's not in Montana.
I'm looking forward to hearing what you think we can discover as we travel the trail in 2025. We need to take a short break. We'll be right back with more Listening to America.
Welcome back to this special edition of Listening to America. I'm Clay Jenkins, and across from me is my friend Nolan Johnson. Nolan Johnson is our editor, so the program you hear every week is edited by Nolan. And Nolan is also our videographer. So on the first journey, the Travels with Charley journey, he joined me a few times and did some wonderful video that we're still processing. We have so much of it. And so Nolan, you are a family man in your 30s. You live here in Bismarck, grew up here. You have a history of Lewis and Clark. You actually started your life in Washburn, which is the home of historic Fort Mandan, and worked for our friend David Borlaug as an interpreter.
Yeah, we were coming up. I was in high school in the early 2000s when we were coming up on the bicentennial, and that was an opportunity for many of us to work as interpreters during those busy summers of 2004 and 2005, giving tours of Fort Mandan, touring the beautiful, nearly new at the time interpretive center that we got in Washburn when we were growing up. And I learned a lot about Lewis and Clark and realized that you grow up in a place like Bismarck or Washburn not having the full respect because it is in your backyard. And so learning about the expedition and what happened, 200 years ago was a really great opportunity for me, and just more understanding of what happened in our neck of the woods.
So I'm sure I ran into you during those years because I spent a lot of time. I'm sure I thought of you some twerp, who's this kid running around pretending he knows about Lewis and Clark, all these guests and their pedal pushers and their Hawaiian print shirts and so on. I'm sure we were scathing about it because we were scholars,
Mm-hmm.
But it was great. David Borlaug has done an amazing thing. It was really his baby to create the Lewis and Clark Interpretive Center, two of them now, one down by the river and one up on the bluff. I should say that the recreated fort built in the 1970s is coming apart, but it's also not where the actual fort was, and no one ever claimed it was. It was just put in a convenient spot, and now the question is what to do as it begins to come apart as a wooden structure that's now 50 years old. At any rate, you have that background, and that's really, people say, how did I get into Lewis and Clark? I always sort of say, well, if you're from North Dakota, Lewis and Clark is your story. We have Lawrence Welk and Lewis and Clark, and that's about it, right? And so I grew up loving it. My first Chautauqua character actually was Lewis before I did Jefferson. I've written a number of books about Lewis and Clark. I edit the Lewis and Clark Quarterly, We Proceeded On, which I urge people to subscribe to. You can go to Lewis and Clark Trail Alliance in Great Falls, and for a small amount of money you can subscribe and become a member. And so I have a huge history in the Lewis and Clark world. And so it's appropriate, I think, that this next year I really do that. And I'll tell you a couple of reasons why. I've already said there are things that I just have never seen, especially in the Ohio Valley. I also want to make some discoveries, if possible, not only Fort Mandan, but things along the river that you can see only from the river. And that's why I want to get out there south of Bismarck, North Dakota. I want to stop at every interpretive sign and take photographs, and every interpretive site, everything that is mentioned that we can identify. Because as the editor of this journal, I always get these articles from people and they don't have any illustrative photographs, or if they do, they're from Kodak Instamatic cameras from the 1960s and 70s, and so they don't hold up in resolution. So I want to get photographs of absolutely everything and catalog them so that whenever an article comes through that's about the Falls of the Ohio, we have great photographs. If an article comes through about the mouth of the Ohio, we have it. So I'm going to take thousands and thousands of photographs, and I'm very excited. And you're going to train me, so I'm told, in drones, because when you're with me, you're a great drone operator. People have seen the quality of your work and the videos that we do and some of the stills. You need to make me at least a rudimentary drone driver, and I will remind both of us that on our initial foray in your parking lot, I crashed into your truck, broke one of the propellers, but these things happen, right?
That could happen to anybody.
But
I think it's a rite of passage when you're operating a drone, or when you want to become a drone operator, that you have to have an accident, hopefully with a tree or something like that.
I'll get better. And I did. I used the drone on the summer trip. I need to get some new equipment for it, but I'll be doing a lot of it. But you will be joining me on a number of occasions. So I want you to, there will be, segment one will be from Monticello to, I suppose, St. Louis. And I want you at the launch, of course, especially if Monticello lets us park the rig within sight of the house. And then at the end of that, when we get to Cairo, Illinois, and get to the St. Louis in Mississippi, then on phase two from St. Louis to Bismarck, I want to get you to South Dakota, where they had their encounter with the Lakota near Pierre, South Dakota. As you know from the maps, there's the Great Bend of the Missouri where It takes 23 miles to go around, and it's only 1,000 yards across. So this huge oxbow, and I want to get a drone up there high enough so we can actually maybe get a boat out there and like a speedboat, and take it around that great bend with a drone following it. That would be absolutely magnificent. And then, of course, when we launch from here to Astoria, I'll want you out at Fort Clatsop at the end of the trail for a number of days, and in Montana at some places, including probably our annual Lewis and Clark cultural tour, which is on the White Cliffs section. And I think if you came for part of that, that would be like one of the highlights of your life.
Absolutely. But you've done this every July,
Every
correct?
July for 20-some years, I've been on the White Cliffs in canoes, and it's the best week of my year. But we've never had a videographer on it because it's so remote. Once you're in the canoes, you're with us for 3 days. But that should not be a problem, right? Just bring waterproof gear.
Yeah, it's a logistical puzzle that I'll be happy to figure out.
But there's one thing I'm so interested in, not to get into the weeds here, but Carl Bodmer came with Maximilian in 1833, and there's this famous photograph called the Gates of the White Cliffs. So when in our first camp on the first night, we leave Fort Benton, go by bus to a place called Coal Bank Landing, then we get in the canoes for about 14 miles and camp at something called Eagle Camp, and it's right in the heart of the most beautiful section of the White Cliffs, and Lewis and Clark were there in that exact campsite. But the next morning we get in the canoes and we go about 2 miles downriver, and then if you turn the canoe around and look back upriver, you see that you camped in the painting, in the Carl Bodmer painting, and it's unchanged to this day. And several times I've gotten in a canoe alone and gone over there and tried to get a photograph, and held up the book and tried to get the exact photograph of the exact scene. Gotten pretty close. But I want you in my canoe that day. I'll climb up on the rocks, and you'll move that drone around, and I'll be kind of directing you, or you'll have a copy of the painting in your hands too, and we'll try to get an exact, but as close as we can get to an exact then and now image of that scene. And so that's where a drone and a good videographer will make all of the difference. So that's the midsummer. And then we go to Astoria, all the way out on the Pacific coast. There is a steamboat, a faux steamboat, the Sea Lion, I think it's called, that goes up and down the river. And I've been on it. I've been a docent on it. But I think we can hire a craft and get out to the mouth, the actual mouth of the Columbia. And it's so amazing. Don't want to scare you, but thousands of ships have gone down there. But if you go over it with the right people at the right time, it's pretty safe now. And when you go over it, they say, all right, we're just like 100 yards from, and you're moving out towards the Pacific, and then you kind of have this thump where the ocean and the Great Columbia River meet, and it's kind of there's just kind of a spasm of the waters meeting, and it shakes the boat. I see this as a chance for me to see things that I haven't seen, but have you at key moments on this trip to get footage that could be in a documentary film. We'll be able to use it for the rest of time. So we got to clear as much of your schedule as we possibly can. I know you have a young family and many other projects, but if we can really capture this, I think it'll be something. And something I wanted to bring up to you also is, if you spend any time on TikTok or Instagram or Facebook now, there are all these reels
Mm-hmm.
of people dancing and climbing Mount Everest, and bears attacking people and people attacking bears. But I was thinking that I would do an almost daily Airstream 2 minutes.
Yeah.
I get up, you know how this goes, and they say the people in their conversion vans are doing a lot of this now. So get up and say, well, today I'm at the Great Falls of the Missouri. Lewis and Clark were here on such and such a date. We had a long night talking around the fire. I'm going to get started here. I got a flat tire. But just those 2 minute, that's not hard to do.
No, a daily itinerary.
And it would build a lot to be able to follow and see what's going on slightly behind the frame.
Listening to America has evolved over the last year and a half. And what do you think is the best way for people to follow along on the journeys that you have taken and will take in the next few years?
That's a great question, and thanks for that. Number one, listeningtoamerica.org, ltamerica.org. We have a weekly free newsletter. We haven't missed a week. So every week I write a couple of articles, a dispatch. There's a video often that you have created, sometimes a video that I've created, some book reviews, etc. and the weekly podcast, which you edit and then post. That's the number one site. But people can follow along on Facebook. We have a Listening to America Facebook site, and I'm able to put content on that without anybody helping me. So that's where I put a lot of my content.
Coming up later in this year, you will be launching a Friends of LTA program. Can you tell me a little bit about the details and where that's at?
So, when you're listening to public radio, they say, it's friends like you that, they have the big campaign, and it's always annoying, but they have to do it. And so we need money to fund all of this, and we're trying to make it simple. So with the old Jefferson Hour, we had the 1776 Club, named for the year of our revolution. So we've changed that to Friends of Listening to America, and we have several levels of engagement, and we're going to offer lots of premium content to those who sign on. So there will be extra video, extra essays, longer pieces that I'm writing about other things. There'll be quarterly Zoom meetings where they can join and have kind of a Q&A or a free-for-all. There will be a lot of extra content, and there are 2 or 3 levels of engagement. And so I'm hoping that people will want to do that. And then, not for the basic level, but for the next level up, there is a book club. And each year now we're going to have a Listening to America book club of 4 books, just 4, because we don't want to overwhelm anybody. And this year I've chosen books related to the American West because I'm not just doing Lewis and Clark. I'm doing Lewis and Clark as a window on the whole, what I call the Europeanization of the continent, beginning in 1492. In 1492, North America was indigenous. And in 1942, it was about 4% indigenous. And so white people basically took the continent from the native peoples, sometimes fairly and more often unfairly. Be that as it may, I want to talk about the larger dynamics of what it means for the frontier of America, the westward movement, exploration of which Lewis and Clark were the main and the first, but not the only. And so I've chosen books that relate to all of that. And we still haven't quite narrowed down what those books are, but I can tell you 2 of them. One will be Gary Moulton's The Lewis and Clark Expedition Day by Day. So after editing the journals for 25 years and doing this masterful 13-volume University of Nebraska edition, he then sat down and wrote out a 1-volume summary of what happened on every single day. And so it's a great introduction to Lewis and Clark, and that'll be one of the books. Another one will be Timothy Egan's Short Nights of the Shadow Catcher, about Edward S. Curtis, the great photographer of Native Americans. And so the book club will meet every 6 weeks or so by Zoom, and we'll have a kind of a Google Classroom where people can exchange ideas and comments and ask questions and so on. But we're hoping that thousands, at least hundreds of people will sign up for that, because I'm a humanities scholar, and so I'm not doing these journeys just to have fun, although they're enormously satisfying. I'm doing it to explore America as we approach our 250th birthday, which will be July 4th, 2026. And so I want there to be that kind of more serious, the more in-depth exploration of our history through the lens of the Lewis and Clark expedition. So people should go to the website, ltamerica.org. They'll see the Friends group coming and the book club coming. And this is a way to fund all the things that we're doing. And we'll record those, of course, for people and make them available free a few months or weeks after they first appear live.
You said the first character
that I ever did.
That you ever did was Lewis. And you've been talking about doing a journal, daily journal in
the manner of Lewis.
The manner of Lewis this year.
This was my friend Russ Eagle, who's a great man. And we're partners in a lot of these things, as you know, as our listeners know. He's been on the Lewis and Clark journey with me. So he said, well, why don't you keep a journal in the manner of Lewis? Which is a great idea. I actually, a number of years ago, started one called The Secret Diary of Meriwether Lewis, and it was pretty low humor and maybe not fit for public consumption. But I found it the other night, and I laughed heartily at some of the entries, because basically Lewis sees Jefferson as kind of a pompous fool, and Lewis had a drinking problem, so every one of his entries ends with, got drunk, or some version of that. There's more vulgar ways of stating that last piece. But anyway, there will be a journal of Lewis every day. I'll write 20 words, 200 words, or 2,000 words in the manner of Lewis, using his words like heretofore deemed endless, and, sublunary love and all this kind of over-the-top terminology that he loved to include. He was a great man and a brilliant writer. He didn't write every day. That's one of the problems of the Lewis and Clark story. But when he's writing, there's nobody's journal that you would rather read than Meriwether Lewis's. And so I thought it might be fun to learn something about his language, but also to have a comic riff on what I'm doing, Flat Tire today, but in the manner of Meriwether Lewis.
Last year when you were traveling in the trail of Steinbeck, you had to have learned something about Steinbeck himself. Do you have any assumptions of what you might be looking for through Lewis and Clark's eyes in 2025?
Yes. So when I traveled in the tracks of Steinbeck, I learned a lot about that book, Travels of Charley, published in 1961, and I learned a lot about Steinbeck. And unfortunately, one of the things I learned was that his heart wasn't really in it. So I learned that. What am I going to learn from Lewis and Clark? Well, I want to get on those waters. You know, I've been on the Mississippi for about 2 hours down near Memphis, but where the Ohio empties into the Mississippi at Cairo, Illinois, the river's almost 4 miles wide, and you just feel the immensity of the Mississippi River. I want to get on a boat on it and just spend a day out there, just feeling the strength of that river. Because when we're in Montana on our annual canoe trip, the river is only about 8 feet deep, and in most places about 4. And so if you tip the canoe, you just stand up. But you're never scared of the Missouri River in Montana. In North Dakota, it's a little bit stronger because of the dams, and the volume is so much greater already. So I want to do that. I want to get as close to the river as possible. That's going to mean some gravel roads along the river. In North Dakota, we have 1804 highway that goes on the right side of the river, and 1806 that goes on the left side. Those are the years of their travel. That's not always true, and so there will be some more rugged travel, and I have to really prepare for that, because those kind of roads really shake things up inside the trailer. And every night you come in and everything's chaos completely. So those are logistical things. We always talk about Stephen Ambrose, who wrote the great book Undaunted Courage, which I'm reading again now. He kept saying from sea to shining sea. And I think that I've never traveled the whole distance. I've driven from St. Louis to Astoria several times. I have been in helicopters over the White Cliffs. I've been in single-engine planes over much of Montana and North Dakota along the trail. I've done the Lewis and Clark Trail in a pretty emphatic way, but I've never done this. And I think that just keeping it slow, meeting the local experts. I'm asking the local experts to take me to places that they know and nobody else knows, kind of their secret window on Lewis and Clark. I don't want to make it a romance. I want to make it real.
Great. I'm looking forward to seeing everything that comes out of this year's travels. We need to take a short break. We'll be right back after a minute on Listening to America.
Welcome back, everyone. This is Clay Jenkinson. I'm sitting here with Nolan Johnson together. Most of the interviews we do these days are done virtually, but I'm in Bismarck, and Nolan lives in Bismarck. We're in his studio in the east side of Bismarck, Quantum Digital. He's our editor, and he's also my friend and videographer. And your father came with us on one of the journeys. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, my father is a 30-plus year coal miner, and always wondered what I was getting into as I was picking a career in journalism or media production. And he loves to take any chance he can to see how the sausage is made. And I actually have family members, even before I had met you and started working with you, that are big fans of yours. So when his aunt expressed such elation that I got to cruise the country with Clay Jenkinson.
Wow.
He's like, okay, I better start paying attention to what Nolan's doing.
This is pretty serious. Yeah.
It was very serious. And I was very fortunate to get the opportunity to start editing the radio show podcast and dive into video with you, and especially on the Travels with Charley tour. And when we went to the Bemidji area,
which is northern Minnesota, where Steinbeck wasn't, by the way. But
right. Well, we were
close by.
So my dad
and Paul Bunyan and Blue Ox Babe, and your dad was there.
Yeah, we got to take a bike ride around the lake.
E-bikes, about 19 miles around the lake.
Still hard work.
It was hard work.
And so he came along. He loves to support in any way, and he drove me.
He was to
meet you.
He was best boy. I mean, he was grip. He did all those things we needed.
He was. He picked the lodging. He drove us to Red Lake. He likes the opportunity to pick up lunch.
Bought
for
us lunch a couple of times
whenever he can.
But he was so agreeable. You could see someone's father just coming. Oh, you two knuckleheads. Are you really going to stop at this puny little river west of Fargo and spend 2 hours trying to get some video? And he was like on board with all of it. It was great.
But that is my dad in a nutshell.
Yeah.
He's along for the ride. He always jokes that I'm just here to drive and pay for things. He's done that since we were taking ski trips when we were young.
But he won't buy me the pickup I need.
No,
so come on, Dad.
we're
working on that. We're working on that.
We're still seeking that 6.2 liter GMC Sierra.
Yeah, so I'm counting on you, man.
Right.
So your dad came in, but you've been on some of these. So it's been such fun working with you. It's one thing for you to edit the program, which you do wherever you happen to be on a laptop, but to be out there. And so, you have an interest in Lewis and Clark, I think more even than in Steinbeck. What are you looking forward to on this great journey? Because you won't be on all of it, so it's important for you to be on the parts that will really matter to you. And I remember last year when we stopped in Montana at Pompey's Pillar, which Clark came to on the return journey and wrote his name in the sandstone there. And I could just tell how excited you were to see that. So what do you really want to see?
I really did connect with Pompey's Pillar, mostly because, like I said, growing up in Washburn, when Fort Mandan's in your backyard, you don't give it the necessary respect.
It's
or the respect that it deserves.
Okay, they were here. Yeah.
Right, and we drove right past Pompey's Pillar for 25 years before
going skiing or whatever you're doing. Your wife was at one point in Great Falls.
Right, yeah. When my wife and I first started dating, she lived in Montana, and so I drove that I-94 right past Pompey's
Didn't know
Pillar
what you were looking at.
dozens of times. And had I known, even because it's hidden behind the trees,
right.
however it's hidden.
Yeah.
And it really doesn't take much to get there and to really get that
it's
appreciation.
Just a mile off the road.
Right, but it's also, and I've said this plenty of times, but I'm lucky to have my built-in tour guide in you,
yes.
who has severe knowledge of this stuff.
Yes.
And I really get to appreciate it legitimately. And I'm not some sort of poser on the Lewis and Clark Trail.
They're not just like, I've worked with a lot of videographers,
right.
and they're just like all business, like get in, get out, get this done. I don't care. The content is of no consequence to them. They're just doing their job, which is what they're paid to do, of course.
Right.
But you have this. I've been so happy to show you Walden Pond, to show you
Beautiful.
Concord, Massachusetts. We're on a ferry crossing from Long Island to Connecticut. Just the things we were able to share, going to the Little Bighorn with Frank, our scout. I mean, just to be able to see this through your eyes, because you're curious, you're interested, particularly in the West, and now this year you'll have the chance to kind of pop in at moments, and so no point in having you come to the routine stuff. I want you to see the great stuff.
I'm looking forward to, you said every interpretive sign that you can come across, you're going to stop. I've realized traveling the country last year that I am much more interested in seeing whether it's a historical plaque for the house next to the Minuteman Bridge,
right,
where Emerson and these great authors were.
Emerson's famous poem, "A Concord Bridge," it was called "The Manse," and we're right there, and we're seeing. And I'd only been a couple of times. We went into the museum. That's the first time I've ever been in the museum. And when we came around a corner and there was Thoreau's desk, I won't say my knees buckled, but pretty close. Like, oh my goodness, that's a sacred relic for me.
And that's the sort of thing I didn't know. The Minuteman Bridge or the Manse or the Concord, Lexington, Walden Pond. I had no idea.
Because you were educated in the public system of the United States.
Right. And I was educated on the West.
Right.
Really. And the Northeast had been stranger to me because I'd never been farther than, I believe, Cincinnati, Ohio.
So this is your first time to New York?
It was my first time to New York.
You went to a baseball game in Boston?
Flew into JFK at 9 p.m. and saw the lights, and my jaw dropped.
It's an unbelievable first visit. Like it's the same as when you see the Grand Canyon for the first time. When you see the skyline of New York, it takes your breath away to think that humans have done that.
Yeah, and I had an audible gasp that the woman sitting next to me on the airplane said, "First time."
First time, huh? Son.
And it was.
So then you went to a baseball game because you have this absurd interest in baseball. So you went to a Red Sox game.
I'm named after a baseball player. My firstborn is named after a baseball player. My brother's named after a baseball player.
I think there should be a restraining order on this, but go ahead.
We might have one. Whenever I'm close to a baseball field, especially one as notable as Fenway Park,
of course,
I'm definitely going to try to go. I was able to hit Fenway and Wrigley in the last year or two.
I just remember we were in Concord, and I said, I'm going to head back to my campsite. You said, see ya, down the road. And I thought, what is so interesting about the Boston airport? But then you went to the game.
Yeah.
And so
Fenway Park, clam chowder in your seat.
They brought it to you.
In your seat.
And so then, I went with Dennis and Russ to a White Sox game, and it was one of the worst things I've ever done. But we happened to be historic because we were there in the worst baseball record in human history. The Sox had the worst record. They won 27 games or some pitiful number. It was great, though, to be there in that. And so it's not just Lewis and Clark. We'll be going detouring at every pause, zigzagging through the West, because if we get close to something like the Little Bighorn, no connection to Lewis and Clark, but of course you're going to go to that. And there's so many places in Montana, Idaho, Washington, and Oregon that are fabulous without any connection at all to Lewis and Clark.
I've never been farther west. I've flown to Seattle.
Yeah.
But I've never been across the Montana border headed west, so I'm really looking forward. I've been to Glacier National Park, but I'm really looking forward to seeing some off the beaten path.
How can you be so sheltered?
This is what I'm.
Because you're not. I mean, we know lots of North Dakotans that don't ever want to go anywhere. That's not you.
It's not me. I've been a handful of places a bunch of times, but I am sheltered in the way that I grew up in Washburn and I've lived the rest of my life in Bismarck. So I've lived in a 40-mile radius my entire life.
And you have young children, and that's, of course, a heavy responsibility.
Right, 8 and a 5-year-old daughter. But I'm not afraid to travel. It's just, what opportunities have I seen? I've traveled quite a bit compared to most 30-somethings, I would say.
And you're not done. I'm not. You want much more.
But I'm not done, and I'm ready to dig in.
Your 8-year-old, named after a baseball player, my friend, is going to lap you in reading one of these days. She's going to. You got to get going because she's going to lap you and say, "Dad, come on, have you read this? Why haven't you read this?" She's what, 3rd grade?
3rd grade, yes.
Reading at like a freshman in high school. 8th or 9th grade level, yeah. So she's going places, man, and she could be a contributor to what we do.
She has the Lewis and Clark map, Frank's map, up on
Frank's
her
map.
wall.
So Frank Lister, our scout, has these time traveler maps. They're marvelous. They're illustrated, and they shows the trail, and they have little paragraphs. We're going to reissue them. It's a great map, and if you're interested in getting it, people, you can just contact Listening to America, and Frank will be glad to sell you. He's done John Wesley Powell. He's done the Colorado Plateau, the Four Corners area, and he's done Lewis and Clark. And these are wonderful maps, and I got one to your daughter, Bryce, and she's got it up.
Yeah, she has it hanging on her wall right next to her Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles poster. But she is very interested. She loves reading nonfiction. There's a great series of books called Who Is or I Was. My daughter is excited that I get to be on the trail with you. You were nice enough to send her
We send a little videos.
And she loves to hear your voice, because sometimes I'll be editing, say, at home, and she knows your voice and hears your voice and knows that you're her friend.
We're friends. I love a young reader. I hope Logan named after a baseball player?
Logan is not named after Logan Pass in Glacier National Park is where we got her name.
That's better. I hope she becomes a great reader too, but I just love to nurture these innocent young people that are falling in love with books, and it's so important. Our school systems, I'm not a critic necessarily, but we need more, and the family provides that. I need to get for Bryce this book that my friend Ev Elbers wrote. He was the director of the North Dakota Humanities Council, friend of David Borlaug, big supporter of the Lewis and Clark. And he wrote a book on Seaman, the dog, the Newfoundland. Right. And it's written in this sort of doggerel poetry. But it's the Lewis and Clark story told from the dog's point of view.
That's great.
And David Borlaug had a Newfoundland at Fort Mandan. I'm sure you met at some point. They don't live long. They're a short-lived dog. But Lewis bought one on a whim, and it went all the way out and presumably all the way back, although it disappears from the journals.
All the more reason for people to ask you, why don't you have a dog with you this year too?
So last year, I'll tell you this story. This woman came on the Lochsaw Lodge trip, and it was about Shakespeare, and she's a fan from Tennessee. And on the first night at dinner, she said, "So I have a dog that you should be taking." And I said, "Okay, I will." And she said no, because she assumed that I was going to say no, and so it was a fake offer, and so now I hate her.
A real invitation.
Yeah, because she didn't really mean it. It was a lying promise, but she dangled this dog in front of me. If I were starting over, I probably would take a dog, even though that's a big responsibility. Yeah. Steinbeck was right that a dog is the number one conversation starter out there. People will trust you that would never trust you alone, but the minute you have a dog. And Liz, my friend, Liz Eagle, we've never encountered a dog that she didn't befriend within minutes, and the family, and gets to know their whole history. And it is such an opening into real conversation. So I'm not taking a Newfoundland, I'll tell you that, in a 23-foot trailer. You need a 75-foot trailer for a Newfoundland. But I would love to have a dog, and if I did, I would want it to be one that was sort of collie sized, not mastiff sized. Right. But I think I'm stuck.
So this woman in Lochsaw wanted
dangles
you to
this
take,
dog. Yeah.
She wanted to take you to take her dog this year, or
well, she said, if you want a dog, I have it. But she thought I would say no, or that trip is over. That's the number one question I get from people that know Steinbeck. And I'm writing this essay now. It would be one of the last essays I write about that trip, about Charley, the poodle, the French poodle. Standard size, not giant, but big dog. Sits when it's on its haunches, it's about 3.5 feet high. And it's about what that trip would have been, what the book would be, Travel to Charley without Charley. And the answer is not much. Charley is the hero of the book. I believe that Steinbeck realized that as he was writing, that the book wasn't going to be great without the dog. And I think, I don't mean this in any negative way, but I think he embellished a little to make Charley a bona fide character. And so if you think of Don Quixote, Don Quixote is this romantic, but he has Sancho Panza, who's like down to earth, or Quick Draw McGraw. If you remember Quick Draw McGraw, the old cartoon, Quick Draw, and then Baba Louie. Baba Louie is down to earth. So Charley is the Sancho Panza character, and Steinbeck is the Don Quixote character. That dynamic really works in that book, but so I didn't have that dynamic. My dynamic was some guy out there alone.
So speaking of Lochsaw Lodge, you spent a couple of retreats there now, but
every year, yes.
It doesn't take long to start planning for next January. What do you have coming
People are
up
already signing up, so we're doing 2 again in January, starting around the 11th, I think. This is just west of Missoula, and people think, why would I go to the mountains in the winter? But it's just it's like being in a snow globe.
There's endless amounts of reasons to go to the mountains in the winter.
Oh yeah, the temperature's 30 or 35 degrees. It snows every day. So you're staying in these beautiful cabins. Some of them have wood stoves. Some of them have central heat. It's magnificent. There's no suffering. It's just all comfort and pleasure. And it's like the book club you've always dreamed of. We meet for 5 or 6 hours a day to talk, and the rest of the time we're just snowshoeing or hiking or reading or napping or writing the great American novel, whatever it is, or drinking for some who just want a couple of glasses of ale. But this year there will be 2 more in January. One is on 4 novels by Cormac McCarthy, who recently died, but his novels are extraordinary, and I can't wait for that. Powerful American writer. If you've seen the film No Country for Old Men, it's based upon one of his novels, and we'll be using that film and the novel. And the other one is on the west of Thomas Jefferson's imagination, which is right in the heart of the Lewis and Clark story. And I should say one more thing, Nolan. We're going to go this summer not only on the usual canoe trip, but I'm doing a little add-on trip on the Judith River landing to James Kipp Landing. And so it's not for the faint of heart. It's a more primitive trip. But if people really feel that they would like to do this pristine, seldom visited area of the Missouri, they should go to ltamerica.org. And we have there aren't many places in it, so people might not be able to get in, but we would love at least to have people make inquiries about that. So I'm trying to make sure everything I do this year is related to the West, and if where possible to exploration and to Lewis and Clark. Anyway, Nolan, I'm so excited that you're excited about this. So we have lots to do. You're going to teach me drone.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to talk more about how I can do these daily Instagram things and not make it a burden, just to make it a simple thing.
Right.
And I don't think that should be very hard. We're going to lay down maps here and try to figure out where the best places are for you to join and what you most want to see. You probably need to do a little reading to read Ambrose or to read David Lavender or one of the summary books about Lewis and Clark, so you can decide for yourself what most appeals to you. But then we'll get that all scheduled, and we want people to join us, so there will be picnics and meet and greets all up and down the trail. And I'm hoping to give talks at almost every interpretive center so that we can build enthusiasm. The Lewis and Clark community is diminishing. It's like the Masonic Lodge or the Elks. There are fewer and fewer people these days. Everyone's on their device. Everyone's doing mediated experiences indoors, flipping through reels. So I want people to get excited about Lewis and Clark again, and so this will be a way to hope to build membership for the Lewis and Clark Trail Alliance and to subscriptions to this really good journal, the quarterly We Proceeded On, that I have the pleasure of editing. So there's so much ahead. I'm so excited about it. I can't wait for spring to come. The rig is in storage in North Carolina. I'm going to drive out there around the 27th of April, and then first stop after Norfolk, where I'm going to see my friend who helped me get the Airstream. Then it's Monticello, and I hope that will be a huge launch party. Thank you, Nolan. We'll see you all next week for another important edition of Listening to America.